All right, here we go, Ted. Another show, another great guest. How you doing, Ted?
I'm doing great, Pat. Looking forward to our guest today.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our next guest. I don't do much bio intro on this one because these people, when they come on, they speak for themselves. So without further ado, Dr. Eric Coram, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. We're excited about this one. So who is Dr. Eric Coram?
Well, uh, I'll give you a little history about where I was and where I am now. And I will tell you this, Pat, I don't think you know this, but one of the reasons I got my doctoral degree was inspired by you, and you going out and doing that and kind of the leading the way. But yeah, so I started as a strength and conditioning coach back in 2004. After I was a walk-on football player at Texas A&M, and Mike Clark was my strength coach. And I love everybody's like, that was my guy, right? That was my strength coach. And I was a pre-med major, and I got really interested in the science of training athletes because we had this physiology lab attached to the weight room. And I'd see these people coming in with the masks on. And this is the early days of Gatorade was doing a lot of their early studies on RTDs. And so as a walk-on, they'd have me go push a sled, drink an RTD. And if I threw up, it wasn't good. And so I was like, hey, coach, what is this? He goes, man, there's a science to training athletes. And, as a walk-on, you're always trying to figure out a way to bridge the gap, to just get on the field. And so that's kind of where it started. And then in 2004, I went to Arkansas as a graduate assistant. I started as an intern under Don Decker. And then I worked on the women's side. They offered me a GA spot. And I was really blessed because I was fascinated with speed development. My first book I read was by Dr. Bob Ward back in the early 90s. And I would do his stuff on the track, as a high school athlete. And so I really wanted to learn how to make athletes faster. And I was very fortunate. One day a coach walked into the weight room and was like, hey, Eric, would you train these athletes? It was Tyson Gay, Veronica Campbell-Brown. I was like, yes. And Veronica had just come off the Olympics in Athens. And so I got to work, and my life really changed because I got a chance to go travel the world with her. And I got to start seeing how different people were training athletes differently around the globe. And I kind of had a light bulb moment, and cut me off anytime you guys want. But I started realizing that overseas, it felt to me as if there was more being put into the development of athletes, like the Australian Institute of Sport. And I was like, why is this? And I started realizing we have a problem in the US. We have too many good athletes. And if you're in Saudi Arabia and you got all this oil under your feet, are you looking for other ways to get oil? No, you're just going to drill below your feet. Because if you go tap the next well, here in the US, athlete gets hurt, whatever, you just go to Miami-Dade County, Florida, go to Houston, Texas, wherever. There's tons of them, right? Tons of great athletes. So I got really interested in what was going on over there, and spent a lot of time working in track. And then in 2010, I got hired by Jimbo Fisher as the speed coach because I kind of built this deal where I could help athletes get faster. And after my first season, things got really crazy. He was like, Eric, I want you to be the director of football operations. I'm like, okay, first of all, that's a total career change. But I've been doing so much organizational stuff for the team in different categories that I think he felt like he could trust me. I was like, all right, coach, I'll do this. Would you name me the director of sports science? He's like, man, you can call yourself whatever you want. Literally, that's what he said. And he didn't know what I wanted to do. And so my life changed because that afforded me the opportunity to have vacation when coach, in the summer, strength coaches, it's you're just done. So when the strength coach was there, I went to Australia in 2011 with my buddy Joe Danos, and we were on an information exchange with the Greater Western Sydney Giants. You guys may know Lachlan Wilmot was there. John Quinn was the high performance director, who's one of the first high performance directors in Australian football. And he was at club called Essendon at the time, which they had won all these premierships. So John brought Joe and I over. We spent a month with the team, helping them on some stuff, and we learned about athlete tracking. So I come back and actually got to see a high performance unit and how it worked. And it was mind blowing. Like, the doctor sat down with the strength coach, the physio, everybody sat down, talked about training loads, talked about what they thought the appropriate dose of work was. And then they went to the head coach and was like, hey, here's what we think. And they're like, cool, all right, let's go. And I was like, wait a second, this isn't supposed to work like this. So I went back to Jimbo. I was like, hey, Jimbo, I had a hunch. Our first season, we went from a 6-win to a 10-win team. From Bobby Bowden, his first year with Jimbo, it was a really successful year, but I felt like we were very talented, but we were overtraining our athletes. And so Jimbo was like, hey, man, I was like, as a coach, I didn't tell him that, but I was like, I'd like to track our players. I think this could give you an advantage. We could quantify the game of football. We could track them in game. We can understand what the requirements of the game are, and we can work backwards. And he was like, let's do it. So I want to tell you a story. Seriously, tell me when to shut up. So after the first practice, Ted, I think you're going to like, as a guy that's dealt with a lot of data, I think you're going to love this. I go into coach. So I hired a former NASA propulsion engineer to help me with the catapult data, because at the time there was no open field. It was just raw telemetry data. And it was in a horrible format. So I was like, hey, this is what I want. I want this, 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 and this. Give me the heart rates. I can break that down. I want distances. I want these velocity bands. So I go into coach and I give him this report. And he's like, so was practice hard? I was like, well, I think so. And dude, he just like MF'd me right there. And so I went back to my office and I'm like, okay, where did I screw up? And I realized that I'd given an executive a bunch of data that he had no idea how to use. And that's when it really first hit me that data without insight is completely useless. So fortunately, he let us track that season. All we did was track. We didn't say a single word until the season was over with. That was not a good season for us. We were very injured, and we lost to some teams we shouldn't have lost to. And at the end of the year, coach was like, all right, what did you guys find out? And there was two big things that we found out. Number one, we were practicing like 3 to 4 games worth of volume before we got to game day during the week. Number two, our training camp was incredibly monotonous. Like day 1 was day 5, day 20 was. And we all know from a periodization standpoint, that ain't going to work. And then number 3, we're training all the athletes exactly the same. Now, you and I could look at the game and be like, hey, look, a receiver does something different than a lineman. But when I could show them, like, look, a lineman sprints like 50 yards in a game versus a receiver playing core 4 special teams may sprint 1,000 high-speed yards. There's a difference. He's like, all right, so what do we do? I was like, we need to apply a little periodization to training camp. I think we need to train the athletes based off of the demands of their positions. And then I think we need to monitor our best players during practice and come up with like, hey, coach, this guy's getting worn down. And then we so anyways, he went with it and took a lot of guts. And the next season, we had an 88% reduction in injuries. And then we had a very talented team that showed up and played to their potential. Great coaches, great athletes. And we let the athletes do their thing, and we won a championship. And I think you guys know sometimes the best job a coach can do is to get out of the player's way. And that kind of blew things up a little bit, like the NFL flew in and was like, hey, what are you guys doing here with this tracking technology? And I explained it, and I was talking about player health and performance, and all they're thinking about is dollar signs because of fan experience. But then other coaches from other teams start calling, and then this NFL, and it just kind of blew up. All of you guys have used it, Ted, you've worked with it in the NFL. And so my career kind of took a big turn, and went on to be at Kentucky, and then was with the Houston Texans. And then I'll tell you where I am now. And then in 2019, I had this opportunity, Pat, to be a part of this thing called the Presidential Leadership Scholars. And a friend of mine told me about this, and it's a group of people that the presidential centers of George W. Bush, George H. Bush, President Clinton, and the LBJ Foundation. It's like 60 scholars a year. And you get trained for about 6 months by the former presidents themselves and their administrations on leadership, on how to take an idea, make an impact with it. So they bring a very diverse cohort, people in business, people that are in public office, to basically help change society. And I got in and I was like the total oddball, but for like my world totally changed. And I started getting this feeling like I could have a bigger impact. And I didn't want you, and this is just in sports, your impact is always there's a ceiling on it based off of the person that you work for. And I didn't want to experience that anymore. And so I had this idea in 2019. I was like, you know what, as I'm going through this, I'm like, I wonder if people that wear wearable devices have the same problem that we had in sports when we first started with tracking. We got a ton of data, no insight. And I did some market research, used my academic training, and the answer was yes. It was a resounding yes. So I started researching and asking people, what do they want out of their wearable tech? The number one response was they wanted more energy. This is everyday folks. This is not athletes. So I called my friend up at the University of Iowa. I was like, hey, let's run a study, a pilot. Let's see if we can link Apple Watch data and a couple other things to people's perception of their health and wellness, most specifically their energy level. We found that not only could we predict people's energy level, we could predict their energy and mood states multiple days in advance using some very novel machine learning methodologies. One of the guys in the Presidential Scholars cohort who I was asking for advice, little did I know, he was a multinational. I knew he was the CEO of a company. I didn't know how big the company was. He's a very successful entrepreneur. He's like, Eric, you've hit the mother load. He's like, you need to build this company. He wrote me a check. And so I had a decision to make. And so in 2020, I left to build this company, AIM7. So that's a long story, but I hope that's encouraging to some folks, because like life changes, your career is going to change, and you could still have impact. It may just look a little different. So I'll shut up for now.
I think that's a great story there, because it stresses the importance of being a lifelong learner, and having that approach. You never know when you come to the fork in the road.
Yes.
You're prepared. You could go either direction.
No question. No question. You just got to be cognizant of it, and you got to listen to folks, and then you got to pull the trigger and make a decision and go.
Excellent. Hey, one thing when we listen to your career path here, and let's just say you have a young person that's listening to this podcast, they're at a high school or say a Division III school, very limited resources, and they go, we want to, I'd like to interject some sports science or a high performance model. I have very little budget. And they'd said, Eric, where should I start? What would your response to that individual be?
Communication. Man, Ted, I think we could all say we've all made a ton of mistakes in our careers, and that's how you learn, right? Is you kind of have this, like, you start acquiring wisdom over time, right? And hopefully I'm to the point where I'm starting to get a little bit wiser. I've made the mistake with leaning into technology, and technology can be a problem. It can be a big solution. Like some of the biggest innovations in the past 20 years have been technological innovations, but the commonality between a great solution and the pairing of technologies is that you're solving a real pain point for somebody. Okay. I think at the high, and I was very fortunate for about 5 years to work with Nike on their performance council. And every year I would go to Oregon and I would meet with the top, quote, 50 head football coaches in America. And I would just sit there and listen to these guys talk. And you're like, man, they understand communication and culture. And then I would get up and talk about how to integrate these things. And it was really simple stuff because they already had a good culture, because they already had good communication. They could put this stuff into practice, and they did amazing things with it. So like, for instance, I would think without technology, I would ask myself, does our staff all share the same mental model of what, let's say, the game of football really is? What is it that actually happens in a game? Do we all understand the coach's desire, like what tactics he wants to implement? And then is everything that we're doing moving towards the X? Meaning, like, if we're going to be playing this no huddle offense, it's doing X, Y, and Z, am I training them from a physical preparation standpoint appropriately? Are our practices set up to create the energy systems and the conditioning required for the game? How are we approaching the mental component? And Pat, you could speak to that better than anybody else. And then are all of us united around that? That's high performance. You're really, like, when I went to Australia, the Greater Western Sydney Giants were a startup team that was operating out of a strip mall. And they were using like some like random field for training sessions because they hadn't built the thing yet. They didn't have the stadium, they didn't have facilities, but they were operating as a high performance unit. And predictably, about 7-8 years after their inception, they were playing for the premiership because they had a plan. So that's what I would say. I'd say it starts with communication. Like, is everybody aligned on the things that are real and objective, and then the coach's desire for what his culture or her culture is going to look like?
Eric, that's good. As you told your story, kind of the timeline and how things happen chronologically, I remember checking in with you like every step along the way, which is cool, because I think when you talk about communication and you pair that up with relationships, because I know you're big on both of those, I think it's pretty special. I think for someone that's listening to this podcast, they should know that the people that they come into contact with, you treat those people with respect, so that, hey, Eric, will you be on the podcast? Yes, make it happen this week. Let's catch up again. Let's share some more information. There's been exchange of information over more than a decade. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty special. What do you say, man, this is research to reps. You dove in really deep into the science at some points. At some point you realize, okay, how do I get that science to the practitioner, the coach? Now you're in the entrepreneurship space. How do you get someone to understand your path how can they look at your path and go, oh, I like to get to some place like that too? Mm-hmm. What advice do you have? I mean, how does that happen? Is it complicated? Is it simple? Is it just choices? Is it just coincidence? Was it your plan? Like, give us some insight.
Let me try to break that down into a couple different responses. First of all, I'll say that I made a lot of mistakes, both, and I think that's really important to acknowledge, like, the mistakes that have been made. I think when you first start out as a strength coach, you're so gung-ho fired up about the programming, right? And don't get me wrong, that is really important. And it makes a difference. Are you, like, really looking at reality for what it is? Do you have talent? If You know, like it may be that you're coming into a situation and you need to upgrade the talent. That's the coach's responsibility. And so you got to really calibrate what reality is. It's going to be 3 or 4 years before any of this is going to show up. And so how are you recalibrating how you're going to deal with people, how you're going to treat your athletes? Because maybe it's going to be a really rough road for a while. And those relationships are going to be the glue. I would also say, just being honest, sports is a brutal place to be because there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of money issues, you know, the haves and the have-nots. Say what people may say about Kier, rugby strength coach. He calls a spade a spade. Him and Pradek Patel, I don't know if you guys know who Pradek Patel is. He was with New York Giants. Like, you should, you know, Pradek and I become friends. And it's like, you know, he never, like when he was going as a strength coach, I never received feedback from my boss the entire time. One time it was after 3 years, I was doing something that I wish I didn't know. He gave me some feedback. Like, why did you wait 3 years? So you need to have tighter feedback loops. Maybe it's somebody that you create a relationship within the organization. They can speak truth into your life and be like, hey, like, this is an area that you need to get better at, right? So that you can be a better person. Or like I'll never forget Rachel Ellsworth. I brought her a program when I was at Arkansas. It was a softball program that I wrote. And I'd only been there like, I don't know, a month or a year. I was like, Ray, what do you think? And she looks at it. She called me up. She goes, I sent it to her via email. She's like, where did you come up with this? This is 2004. And I was like, I don't know. It was kind of like what we did in football. She's like, what are you thinking? I was like, I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm just I'm just right out the gate, you know? And so it was like, she gave me that real feedback. Like, how well do you know softball? You know what I'm saying? Who's speaking into your life? So I would say, like, if you have a goal or a place that you want to get to, you need to have good feedback loops. Whether it's an older, wiser coach that's going to call you on your junk, which I wish I had more of that. Maybe it's somebody that's a critical eye. Maybe you're talking to your coaches on what the feedback from the players is. Like, you have to really crave feedback, even if it hurts. So that would be like the number one thing. The second thing is like managing up. And that's a skill, Pat, that you've probably honed in really well over your career, is like, you relate to the head coach. How are you managing up? I recently had Dana Perino on my podcast. I don't know if you know Dana Perino. She's the anchor for America's Newsroom, Fox America's Newsroom. And she was the first Republican female White House press secretary. Talk about some big shoes. And she talked about the art of managing up and how important it was for her to manage up with her, you know, with the president of the United States. And I was like, dang it, I really wish I would have known how to do that earlier. But it's a skill set. She actually writes about it in her book, Everything Will Be Okay. But it's a skill set you need to acquire, whether you're an assistant strength coach managing up to your head strength coach, whether it's an assistant strength coach managing up to your softball or tennis strength coach, or managing up to the head football coach. Or if you go to the National Football League, how are you managing up to your general manager? Setting expectations, being attentive to what they need, and then providing really like high fidelity solutions. So it's not always about like the specific X's and O's, because that's never going to be the same across any situation. It's like, are you a great problem solver? Are you managing up? Are you listening? Are you solving the real problems that need to be solved? And are you getting the feedback loops that you need to continue to grow and mature and not have to learn the hard way? Like I've had many times where it's like, man, I didn't really, why did you wait 2 years to tell me I was rude in that situation? You know, like I would have like swallowed my pride and said, I'm sorry, but nobody told me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to be really honest here because I have nothing to lose. But like, those are the things where it's like, and then I'll be honest, you got to look out for the sharks in the water. Because the reality is there's people out there that do not have your best intentions at heart. And they want, Pat, tell me if I'm wrong here.
Nope.
They
You're
want
right.
nothing more than to take you out. Ted?
Oh,
Lying?
no,
It's not fun to talk about.
no. It's within every organization.
It's in the Bible. Joseph, in the multicolored coat, he starts telling his brothers how he's having these dreams and how his family's gonna bow down to him. First of all, Joseph probably should have tempered his words, right? Then his
Right.
brothers got what? They got jealous and they basically sold him off into slavery. But if you know the rest of that story, things ended up working out being pretty good. My point is, be careful what you say, try to be humble about it. And then not everybody's going to be excited about your success. So try to, the more you can make it about the team, the more you can make it about other people. Unfortunately, in public schools, everybody knows how much money you make. That can create dissension. And then, I'm just trying to just bring up the big, the big stuff that I struggled with and nobody told me about, and then I stepped on landmines, some of my own doing and some of it things I just, could have avoided.
With regard to what you're currently doing, and you touched upon it. In essence, you're sort of taking high performance components literally to the executive marketplace.
To anybody with an Apple Watch.
So, and the points are still the same, is that
Yes.
all of these guidelines, you'll perform better at your job because you'll have better cognitive clarity and performance on a daily basis. So whether you're an athlete or an executive, if you follow some of these same guidelines, the points is great performance, whether you're an executive or an athlete.
Yeah, my original idea was to create a consulting company around a high performance model. And then my buddy, Mark Hadar, phenomenal human being, came from Lebanon with like literally a few $100s in his pocket and built amazing companies that have had huge impact. And he goes, we're literally sitting on a bus on the way back from the LBJ ranch. And I'm articulating this vision. He goes, Eric, how can you do this and never be tied down to client hours? Or how can you, mass impact? He goes, it's through technology. So what do you know? I was like, I know wearable tech and sports science really well. He's like, well, how can you help people with that to solve a real problem? And so we're turning wearable technology from like Apple or Whoop or Aura into healthy habits. And we kind of have this pathway we're doing it. But you're right. It was like the model, if you start learning about mental models, you can start understanding how to solve problems in different spaces. And I just looked at, I call it mid-career professionals and household CEOs. That's me and my wife right now. We got 3 kids. We don't have a lot of time. We want to be healthy. I need a simple solution. It's like a football coach that doesn't have a lot of time. And if I'm going to look at this report, it better be 1 page and have like big, like red X, like don't do this. Everybody's going to blow up today. That's the same thought process. Simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah. What is some of the research and science that you've pulled on to help you with this technology?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I started creating different algorithms for things started when I was at Kentucky. So I'll tell you where it started. Did you ever read Chris Morris's dissertation on fluid periodization that we did at Kentucky?
Yes.
So that's where it started. So Pat, real quick for everybody, we're using omega wave technology, looking at direct current potential of the brain, which is a slow cortical potential, which represents basically how all the subsystems of the body are able to adapt to stress, and then heart rate variability. And what we did was we let the teams, opt in as they wanted to. And we had guys, I think we had 6 different programs going at the same time for different positions. But you would have the choice of using omega wave every morning, and then we would create adjustments to your daily programs based off of your state of like how ready you were to train. So Chris came up with a paradigm of how to do that really fast, color coded. So he could literally go to coach and be like, he's blue, he's red. So like blue was they actually do 20% more than they were supposed to today. Green was stick with the plan. Then there was a couple different variations. Long story short, after 8 weeks, the guys that used fluid model versus static model had anywhere between 150 to 500% more improvement in things like peak vertical power, aerobic capacity, etc. And the commonality was the guys did less work. And I think it was almost 10% less volume. Started getting calls from everywhere. So when I started looking at like this, like when you build a product, when you build a technology product, you start with something called a minimal viable product. So if you think about a company, like a big company right now, they all started what's called an MVP. It's the smallest, most stripped down version of this thing that can deliver some type of benefit. So the minimal viable product for my company AIM7 is you have wearables and you have content engines like Peloton, Apple Fitness Plus, all this stuff. We're the brain that sits on top of that. So somebody can come into our system every day and they get a dosage of exactly how long and how hard they go that day. And then they can go do the thing that they love. Does that make sense? Then we serve them in areas of sleep. We have content from amazing folks like Dr. Peter Haberl at the USOC. Like I pulled in some of the best of the best. And we teach them how to build these healthy habits, but that's the hook. So what did I learn? I did my doctoral work in sleep. So we teach like this whole process of how to improve your sleep, but it's for people. You always have to remember who your audience is. If a coach is your audience, your message has to change. If an athlete is your audience, your message has to change. Our audience is people that are time poor, that literally have 2 minutes a day. So we can give them like a quick piece of content and they can click a button that literally says, get my exercise recommendation. Boom, they click it, done. And then they can go hop on their Peloton or whatever. So fluid periodization, HRV, sleep, how to use subjective measures, how to create algorithms. So we started creating all these algorithms to create what we call our A7 score, our adaptability score. And then we provide them the appropriate dose that they can use. So I pulled a lot of my learnings from what I did over my career. You never know what you're learning and how it might help or what it's going to pay off with later. And, you know, the biggest issue I've had is I don't know how to code. Listen, everybody on this call, everybody on this podcast, go learn how to freaking code. I got my 9-year-old son coding right now because I had to go them hire coders and then translate these things into technical requirements to go build an app, which is incredibly difficult. And that's where the high performance thing came into play. So the first thing I did, Pat, after I got that check was I made my core values, my vision and my mission. And then we because I wanted to create organizational clarity. I was like, I'm going to be the head coach now. You know what I'm saying? I'm the head coach. It's my responsibility. I want to create the organization that I always wished I was a part of. And we have certain battle rhythms that we do. Like every Friday, part of the thing we teach people is how to create behaviors. So we teach them what's called behavior design. And we have our own behavior design model, which is a model for how to help somebody continue to act on their initial motivations. So somebody wants to get more sleep. Like how do we lower all the barriers? And they have a process that they can wire in these new habits. And one of the things we do is we teach people to celebrate or acknowledge their success. And so at the end of the week, our whole team is on a Zoom call and we celebrate each other. And we literally call out like, hey, Pat, I want to celebrate you for doing this, this, and this. And it always leaves the week on a really high positive note. Because how many times in your life does somebody actually sit there and acknowledge you on a deeply personal level? Doesn't happen very often besides maybe your wife or your kids. And to have a teammate, could you imagine a bunch of coaches sitting around a table celebrating each other? Do you imagine that would do for an organization?
Did you say coaches?
But that's what that's like the, you know. And so what I did my whole career was I started logging these things. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be this guy. I have venture capitalists investing in this. Like I got to go build that organization so that we can deliver this thing. And I use the learnings and my shortfalls and my shortcomings to try to build something that hopefully is a sustainable organization for success, you know, that makes a deep impact.
You know, when you are building this model for your organization, what were the areas that you felt academically that you had to read up on extra?
Have you guys ever heard of the book Measure What Matters?
Yes.
It's called Objectives and Key. Pat, this is going to be your thing, man. Objectives and key results. So goals are one thing, but OKRs, it came from Intel. So now that I'm in this technology world, dude, like it's a whole nother vernacular I've had to learn. But I heard all these people talking about OKRs. One of my friends, he was worked at MIT's Media Lab. He was an advisor for AIM-7. He's like, Eric, you got to have OKRs. I'm like, what is that? He's like, so you have an objective and you have a key result. So we do this quarterly because in the business world, everything's done by quarters. So we're in Q4 right now. So we have objectives, things that we believe that we need to accomplish in the areas like people, product, fundraising, et cetera. It could be for you, it could be the health of the team. It could be, I don't know, third down, whatever it is. Those are the objectives. We want to be 55% on third down, or we want to have 95% of our roster available. OKRs, you have objectives, which is like what you want to accomplish. Like maybe it's player health, or you will be 55% on third down or whatever. And then key results are the things that you do that you say, if we do these things, we will achieve the objective. So let's say you want to have 90% of your roster available. That would mean maybe a key result would be work with the head coach to periodize practice. Maybe there's something in there, and let's say you have hamstring injuries or common injury for this sport. What are we going to be doing to mitigate against hamstring injuries? Maybe you live in a very hot, humid environment. Maybe there's something you're doing around hydration. If our team is 95% hydrated, your objectives should be stretch. They should stretch you, meaning if you obtain 70% of that objective, you won. That's how hard it should be. So Google the whole, and this is why you can use it for organizational clarity. You can push it to massive organizations because everybody is now aligned on, we have 5 objectives as an organization. These are the 4 key results that we all need to do. And it's very easy to figure out where you align and what your responsibility will be. So OKRs, measure what matters. I wish I would have used that a long time ago.
So the name of that book was
Measure What Matters.
Got it.
What was the original question, Ted? We got OKRs. What was the original question?
The original question was, when you're as you've started this company, when you look at your experiences both academically, what were the areas that you've had to go back and learn more on?
Yeah, so OKRs, leading in a virtual environment. So all the stuff on leadership, now we're in a virtual world. I've really had to dig in. There's a guy named Dr. Michael Platt. He wrote the book called The Leader's Brain. He was on my podcast, The Blueprint, and he talked about, he's a Wharton, and he works on neuroscience across the entire University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton Business School. And the whole book is about the neuroscience around how to develop great teams and how leaders lead. And one of the things he talked about is like, all my team is dispersed around the world. Literally, Mexico, different time zones. So how do you create a relationship with somebody you've never met? So even the position of your camera, he talks about like how you need to like literally look directly into that lens, and you need to have the camera positioned in a way that they're looking at you, because it creates eye-to-eye contact, which creates a different level of connection versus like this. Like you're like, dude, what is wrong with you? But how many meetings have you been on where it's something bizarre like that? Little things like, how do you create connectivity within an organization, and how do you get this deep sense of belonging? so that people will want to work hard for an objective. And they're not just, one of the things that there's something called product management. And in a tech company, there's the product and then there's sub-products. So like YouTube is a product, maybe there's a sub-product of playlists, and there's a whole team around that. Okay. And one of the things that's really important about being a product manager is you want missionaries and not mercenaries. Meaning like the people that are developing my product, I don't want them to be just point and shoot people. I literally want them living, eating, breathing, understanding this thing. So like you can relate that to your teams. Like, are the people on my staff or my organization, are they just there to just do their job and just get it done to check a box? Or are they like truly understand the pain points of the student athletes or the athlete and are doing, and everybody's aligning to solve those pain points? So that's another thing. And then the reading and the literature review never goes away. I think I read more now. Now that I got a podcast, crap, I read all the time. And it's like, you know, it's forced reading, but it's really good. It stretches me. And, you know, I've learned a lot about sales and marketing. And I know that's kind of weird, but as a coach, you know, Brett Bartholomew's hit on it. Your message, you got to sell your message. These are all things I wish I would have known about. They don't care about the reps and the sets. They just don't. They care about performing at their best. They care about, you know, how they can make their family proud. They care about, am I going to be able to use this to further my, you know, can I make money off of this? How am I going to get my degree? I got 5 things to juggle, you know? And so like, how are you selling? Anyways, these are all the things that like, I should have been thinking about rather than 5 by 3 at 72.5%.
Well, Eric, one last question. Ted usually asks this question, but I'm looking at the time and I know you've got to go.
Yeah.
You've already listed at least 2 books, and I've already went to my Amazon there in my cart. So what other books or readings or resources can you tell our listeners about? And then the follow-up question to that, where can our listeners and viewers find you?
Awesome. I'm actually pulling something up on my my phone here to help answer this question. The Molecule of More is a great book all about dopamine that I highly recommend. A Pearl in the Storm. President Tori Murden McClure in Louisville at Spalding University. One of the best pieces of literature I've ever read. You want to talk about mental toughness? She was the first American to solo row across the ocean. And she was the first American to ski to the geographic South Pole. And I had her on and she wrote a classic piece of literature. The Passion Paradox by Steve Magnus. This book right here, I just had this guy on today. He wrote Passion Paradox with Steve. It's called The Practice of Groundedness. Phenomenal. And I already started putting some of this into practice in my own life because it's easy to get burnt out when you're always chasing these ridiculous goals. So those are a couple that I would really highly recommend. As far as like where you can find me, my podcast, The Blueprint, on Instagram at Eric Quorum. And then look, if you have a wearable device, like an Apple Watch or Oura Ring or whatever, AIM 7 is free right now. It's going to be free for a little while. Check it out. Let me know how I can make it better. I'm a feedback maniac. Every single person that comes into as a user gets a custom onboarding. So your feedback would be appreciated. And I have coaches that are using this and are really loving it because they've loved the behavior design model. They're figuring out ways to apply this with their athletes. So yeah, aim7.com and AIM7.com.
Wonderful. Ted, it's been another good one.
Absolutely. I know I got some reading to catch up on now.
Well, guys, I just want to tell you, thank you for having me on. I appreciate the impact that you guys continue to have. And I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be on your show today.
Thanks a lot. Yep. Take care. You have a good night.